It's awful. Not tasty at all. What is this? I can't bring myself to eat such a dish. I'm curious about the face of the person who cooked this. Leaving those words behind, my mother-in-law smiled lightly, looked at me intently, and eventually, while slightly touching the food on the plate, ended up throwing it in the trash. Seeing her behavior towards the food, I honestly wondered what kind of person she was. Was it really appropriate to treat food in such a way? Sitting next to her was her most beloved son. Did she see how sad he looked? My name is Susan. I'm an office worker and I just turned 30. I married my husband Ryan 2 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. Of course, we dream of expanding our family in the future, but for now, we prioritize our time together and want to enjoy our fulfilling days. Ryan has always been a considerate and kind man since we first met. I've never seen him angry. We both work during the day, and when it comes to household chores, we share them properly. I mainly handle the cooking, and Ryan diligently does the cleaning and laundry. My cooking skills aren't professional, but thanks to my mother's teachings, I can make various dishes. I can't express enough gratitude to my mother. However, because I would only be able to start preparing dinner after coming back home from a full day of work, we would end up eating a bit late. As for me, I can finish preparing several dishes in about an hour, so I thought that was an average cooking time. But then, my husband said something unexpected. Your cooking is really delicious. So, if possible, I'd like to have dinner a bit earlier. He seemed somewhat apologetic when he conveyed that. But I thought I was doing well preparing the main and side dishes, including soup, all in about an hour. I thought that's quite normal. As I looked a bit puzzled, Ryan immediately added, "No, that's not what I meant, sorry. I'm not saying you should cook faster. It's just that my mother always prepared this amount in about 15 minutes. Really? That's amazing. That night's menu included salad and soup full of vegetables. For the main dish, there was steak, and as a side dish, mashed potatoes. Thinking that all these could be made in 15 minutes made me wonder, perhaps my mother-in-law is exceptionally good at cooking? With a slight competitive spirit and pressure, I was motivated to cook daily for my husband. I made preparations so that dinner would be ready right when we got home, and I would even cut ingredients and do some prep work the night before. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it under 30 minutes, always feeling regretful while keeping an eye on the time. Nevertheless, Ryan never complained and helped with laundry and other household chores while I was cooking. Ryan, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to be faster, but it seems 30 minutes is my limit. He comforted me, saying, "It's my fault, isn't it? The meals you make are really delicious, so I might have expected too much." Ryan gained about 10 pounds after our marriage, though he's still within a normal range. Seeing him happily eating and having seconds of the meals I prepared was my joy. As time passed, the topic of visiting our parents' home after a long while came up. "Hello." When I greeted everyone cheerfully as usual, a voice came from inside the house. "Susan, you're as energetic as ever. Your voice reaches every corner of the house." My mother-in-law's voice was light, and she seemed to be smiling, but her eyes were not laughing. This kind of thing happens all the time. In other words, she was probably being sarcastic by saying that the sounds I made were noisy today, but I didn't mind it. From the outside, it looked like a good relationship between a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law. But the mother-in-law was really skilled at mixing female-specific sarcasm into praise and indescribable jokes. Naturally, my husband and always calm father-in-law never noticed it. In fact, I knew before I got married that my mother-in-law didn't like me. The cause was during a meal when both families gathered. "Oh, isn't that Susie?" The one who spoke to me like that was Ryan's grandmother. "Ah, Hilary, why are you here?" My mother-in-law looked at us calling each other so casually with a questioning and stern expression. Seeing my mother-in-law's demeanor, I tried to show respect by saying, "Good day. Might you be Ryan's grandmother?" But it was already too late. My mother-in-law was staring at me as if I was an enemy. I regretted it, but it was already too late. Since I had known beforehand from my husband that the relationship between his mother and grandmother was not good, I felt I should be careful. That day, my grandmother couldn't attend the gathering because she had a cold. Hillary's residence and the house where I grew up were close, and Hillary was a good friend of my grandmother. When I was living at my parents' home, she often came to visit, and since I loved my grandmother very much, I also got along very well with Hillary. They both lost their husbands, but they were spending their later years enjoying life with the motto, "Let's have fun even at our old age." When she looked at my clothes, she would say, "Susie, that coat looks warm. How much does it cost?" "This coat? I got it for about $20, I would reply. The three of us, my grandmother, Hillary, and I enjoyed our similar preferences. I want to go to a bar. Whenever there was such a request, I happily accompanied them. Hillary was like a second grandmother to me. My daughter-in-law is a bit clueless. She's not a bad person, but she's stiff and hard to get close to," Hillary often said. I thought it was harsh, but I never imagined I would experience something similar myself. After getting married, as I had imagined, the subtle sarcasms from my mother-in-law never stopped. "Susan, your makeup gets thicker every time we meet, doesn't it? Youth is wonderful." Or, "Ryan, you seem to have gained a bit of weight since you've been with her. Is the balance of your meals okay? Or is it the influence of both of you working?" There was a daily barrage of sarcasms. There was a time when I brought several dishes I had cooked for some occasion. "Susan, you're good at cooking, aren't you?" When my father-in-law commented like that, my mother-in-law was clearly displeased. After eating just a little of my dish, she said, "Is this really so amazing? I can make it easily, too." Showing off something like this lacks class, and spoke in a voice that only I could hear. After that, my mother-in-law didn't eat at all. Mom is also very good at cooking, so we are lucky. Right, Dad? When my husband said this, my father-in-law nodded. My mother-in-law wasn't displeased with that comment, and soon regained her mood. Her mood changed frequently, like a roller coaster. I felt a bit sad, wondering if the meal I made was not to her taste. But when I looked away for a moment, the leftover food had disappeared. When I secretly peeked into the kitchen, I witnessed my mother-in-law transferring the remaining dishes I had cooked onto a plate and storing them in the freezer. Does that mean she liked it? Is she just being very moody, perhaps? I had the luxury to feel that way at that time. However, after hearing my husband's remarks the other day, I held a subtle sense of competition with my mother-in-law. "Mother, I heard from Ryan that you can prepare meals in a short time. I'd love to learn your secret." To that suggestion, my mother-in-law briefly showed a displeased face and retorted, "Why do I have to teach you? That's an absolute no. You're still a beginner. You have no idea how much time it takes to reach a level like mine." As usual, I received a slightly harsh response. It was particularly strict when it was just the two of us. No proper eye contact, not even looking straight at me. Being avoided to this extent hurt me, too. When we met before the meal, she was kind to me. However, as soon as she learned that I got along well with Ryan's grandmother, her attitude toward me changed 180 degrees, and she started treating me like an enemy. I hope that if we could understand each other a little more, we could build a better relationship, but it felt like a distant dream. The time I spent worrying increased day by day. Every time I visited my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law prepared the meals by herself. Actually, when I first visited my in-laws' house shortly after getting married, I once asked her, "Mother, is there anything I can help with?" I called her out from behind, but I didn't expect that it would surprise her very much. "This place. You shouldn't open it without permission." She suddenly closed the door to the kitchen. My reaction upon hearing that was one of great surprise and also confusion. I had heard from friends who were troubled by being strictly taught by their mother-in-laws, or who were made to repeatedly serve coffee during Christmas. So I felt that it was a relief for me in terms of not having to cook. It was a bit hard to be instructed to constantly tend to the garden during the cold Christmas Eve. However, It wasn't too difficult because my husband helped me halfway through. Thinking about it, the speed at which my mother-in-law's cooking appeared on the table was indeed fast. The first dishes served included hamburgers and potato salad. Then came corn soup and several other dishes. Each was at just the right warmth, had a somewhat nostalgic taste, and was very delicious. I would be happy if she could teach me her recipes. With that in mind, I started to often look at recipe books during my break time. Susan, you've been looking at cooking books a lot lately, haven't you? I'm really impressed that you're bringing such elaborate homemade lunches every day. I usually have frozen meals for lunch. The one who approached me with a smile was a younger colleague at the office. If I were single, I think I'd be no different from you. The frozen meals nowadays are well balanced, so I think that's fine. After listening to my words, my junior colleague passionately talked about his favorite frozen meals. I especially liked it when I got to sample a hamburger steak from a diner at the supermarket. It's really tasty. Following that conversation, I suggested to him, "From now on, your nickname will be Frozen Meal Lover, okay?" To which he replied with a laugh, "That's a bit." Amidst such daily life, before I knew it, my mother-in-law's 60th birthday was approaching. Last year, we had a grand celebration for my father-in-law's 60th birthday, so we couldn't ignore my mother-in-law's birthday. I was worried whether she would be happy with the celebration since she didn't like me. "Ryan, your mother's birthday is coming up soon. What should we do?" When I asked my husband, he said, "Actually, I'm planning a surprise," and smiled at me. And then, the following month was my mother-in-law's special birthday. I had a meeting with my father-in-law, and he agreed to take my unsuspecting mother-in-law out of the house for a while. My husband was already excited about the surprise, saying she'll definitely be amazed. Despite feeling a bit anxious, I helped my husband with the room decorations and continued waiting at home for my in-laws to return. We're home. I heard my father-in-law's calm voice from the entrance of the house. That was the signal for the start. My husband and I hurried to the entrance and, with the crackers we had prepared earlier, we loudly said, "Happy birthday, Mom." However, when I saw my mother-in-law's face, her reaction was underwhelming. Honestly, she seemed even less happy than before. Trying to surprise me? But why here? This must have been Susan's idea, right? She glanced at me with a glare and then quickly entered the house. It was common for my mother-in-law to be cold to me, but it was surprising for her to act this way in front of her son and husband. Afterward, my father-in-law said, "I'm sorry. I got into a bit of an argument with Mom," implying that my mother-in-law got upset over something minor and hardly spoke on their way home. Feeling troubled, we followed her. As soon as she entered the living room, she let out a deep sigh. We had worked hard on the decorations, but she didn't seem to have any particular reaction to them. She sat down heavily on a chair, clearly in a bad mood. This atmosphere, it's not fitting for a celebration. It's awful. That's how I felt. "Oh, what about dinner?" We worked hard for it. Then my husband and I proceeded to the kitchen. That's when my mother-in-law yelled at me with an unexpectedly loud voice. "Wait, did you enter the kitchen without permission? Susan, can't you keep a promise?" She stared at me intensely. While I was struggling to respond, my husband said, "Why are you so irritated, Mom? It's okay to enter the kitchen." I told her it was okay. I had promised my mother-in-law not to enter the kitchen alone, but my husband, with a smile, encouraged me to go in, saying it was fine. Unable to say anything against her beloved son's words, my mother-in-law quieted down. My father-in-law watched the situation with a wry smile. The atmosphere was a bit awkward, but the hastily prepared, slightly unappealing dishes were lined up on the dining table. Perhaps out of consideration, my father-in-law kindly commented, "This looks delicious. I can't wait." But my mother-in-law was constantly in a bad mood, sulking like a child. When all the dishes were ready, we started the meal with "Happy birthday, Mom. Cheers." It was right after that. Disgusting. Not delicious at all. What is this? I can't bring myself to eat such food. I'm bothered by the face of the person who cooked it. My mother-in-law suddenly said that. Her gaze was definitely directed at me. Of course, it wasn't a fact that it was disgusting, but rather a sarcastic comment from her. When I remained silent, my mother-in-law added, I don't know how much effort you put in, but if this is the result, you still need more training. She snorted and smiled smugly. Her behavior didn't stop there. Saying, I can't eat such food, she threw the dishes into the trash. Unable to contain my anger, I raised my voice. What are you doing? Please apologize. Even so, my mother-in-law did not listen to my voice. In the quiet room, my husband, his voice trembling, said to me, Susan, that's enough. Let's leave this place quickly. However, my mother-in-law watched the exchange with a look of surprise on her face. After that, my usually calm father-in-law raised his voice. What have you done? Ryan worked hard to prepare those dishes for you. At this, my mother-in-law's face changed color in surprise. Perhaps she hadn't noticed because of her excessive anger, but Ryan's hands were covered with multiple band-aids. Seeing this, it seemed that my mother-in-law finally understood the seriousness of the situation. Oh, despite that, what have I done? Though my mother-in-law was shaken, there was no one there who felt like helping her. I spoke to my mother-in-law calmly. I know you don't cook much, mother-in-law, but preparing ingredients, seasoning, and cooking takes a lot of time and effort. But as I imagine the smiling faces of those who will eat it, I continue to cook with all my heart. As my mother-in-law remained silent, I said, I'm sorry. I couldn't find time to make the cake myself, so I bought it. I thought I would chill it in the refrigerator. So I opened it. At those words, my mother-in-law's face, which had been pale, suddenly flushed. When we opened the refrigerator, the reason for my mother-in-law's fast cooking speed became apparent. Inside the fridge was mostly microwave-ready foods, with famous brand cafeteria-style dishes being particularly noticeable. As we opened the freezer, we found it was packed with frozen meals. Seeing this, my husband smiled and said, Oh, it seems Mom is not good at cooking either. With her birthday approaching, Ryan was excitedly planning a cooking surprise. And for the next month, he practiced cooking night after night. You've been cooking so much, Susan. I'm always grateful for your delicious cooking. I'm looking forward to seeing the happy look on Mom's face. My husband often said, I suggested it would be better to cook at home and bring it, but he was determined to cook at his parents' house, wanting her to taste it fresh. I was worried, so I bought everything from cooking utensils to seasonings. My husband laughed cheerfully at me carrying even knives and cutting boards, but my intuition was right. My mother-in-law's kitchen was surprisingly clean. Many of the seasonings were old, and the cutting board was a bit dusty. I wasn't too surprised when I opened the refrigerator. I had noticed my mother-in-law's secret before. The hamburger steak I got from my junior colleague the other day had the same taste as the hamburger steak my mother-in-law was proud of. When my mother-in-law was cooking, I frequently heard a beeping sound. Today, I realized that it was the sound of the microwave. Microwave-ready foods are not bad. I also use them when I'm busy, but it felt questionable to boast about them as homemade. As she was still silent, I said this to her. My father was very poor as a child, and if I left even a little bit of food, I would be severely scolded. I was taught that those who take food lightly are the lowest as human beings. And with these words, it meant my mother-in-law fell into that lowest category. Furthermore, my father-in-law surprisingly added that he had decided to divorce her. What she had done was unforgivable, he said. No, please reconsider the divorce. In response, he sternly replied, You are apologizing to the wrong person. My mother-in-law quickly looked toward us and apologized sincerely. Whether or not they would get divorced was not an issue to me. However, I felt that it would be difficult for me to have a good relationship with such a mother-in-law in the future. For the past month, I had witnessed my husband's efforts, so I was purely disappointed. Glancing at him next to me, his expression was very angry. Unlike his usual self, after he finished tidying up his things, he said, Why should I forgive you? Those who take meals lightly are the worst human beings. Moreover, your attitude towards Susan throughout today was terrible. I'm sorry, but I don't want to see your face again." And with that, he left the house. Seeing him angry, I couldn't hide my surprise and said, I'll also take my leave, and I left my in-laws' house with my husband. I heard the crying voice of my mother-in-law from behind us, but I did not look back. After that, regarding my parents-in-law, it was somehow agreed that my mother-in-law would stay at their house under the condition that she would change her attitude toward me. Otherwise, her husband would divorce her. There was one phone call of apology to me. "I'm sorry, but for some reason, I just don't like the way you talk to me as your mother-in-law," she conveyed. "It may be a long time before I can hear a sincere apology, but I'm not looking for one. Whether they would get divorced or not, honestly, feels irrelevant to me." Later on, Ryan's grandmother, Hillary, began living in the same house with my parents-in-law. Originally, the house belonged to her and she lived there with them, but both parties were stubborn, and their relationship had been bad since the early days of marriage. Apparently, Hillary had fled to her daughter's house, which was near where I lived. Hillary, having heard about the recent incident regarding my mother-in-law's 60th birthday celebration, got angry. "I had already given up on you, but now that I know you've hurt my dear grandchildren, I can't stay silent any longer. From now on, I intend to correct your bad nature. It's not enough just to know how to use a microwave," she said. Thus, it seems that my mother-in-law, who had just turned 60, began to receive some belated housewife training from Hillary. "That lady over there, the other day she apparently spent over 15 minutes just to peel one carrot. I heard this from Hillary," said my grandmother when I visited my parents' house. Hearing that story, I smiled. My husband became emotional only on that particular day, and the next day he was back to his usual gentle self. As I saw him eating the food I made happily, I wondered if what had happened was just an illusion. But clearly, it wasn't a hallucination, and it seems he has no intention of forgiving his mother in the future. They were both stubborn, and I couldn't help but smile at the resemblance between them. Susan, what's wrong? Did you lose your appetite?" "You've barely touched your food," Ryan asked, concerned about my lack of appetite. I smiled brightly and pointed at my belly. Seeing that, my husband stood up in surprise and said, "No way. Soon, our family would get an addition." Hoping for a pure and kind-hearted child, I thought about spending the coming days with my beloved family.